Hello learners, welcome to this beautiful session of ours. Today is a continuation of what you were doing earlier on. Recall, in our previous classes we've been looking at some various concepts. Today's concept allows us to handle the concept to do with the issue of shares and basically see what this entails. So I want us to handle this question of ours. It is from a model paper, and this question I'm just sharing it right now. This is a question that I want us to handle. It will open our mind very wide when it comes to the concept of issue of shares. So, going through this question, these are what you're told, that Hisa Limited has 1 million ordinary shares outstanding at the current market price of 50 shillings per share. The company requires 8 million to finance a proposed expansion project. So there is a project that we're planning to come up with, and this project requires to issue new shares of, this case we are talking of 8 million. We require 8 million to finance this new project of ours. Okay. Then we also told that finance proposed the expansion project. The board of directors has decided to make one for 5 rights issue at a subscription price of 50 or rather of 40 per share. The expansion project is expected to increase the firm's annual cash inflow by 945,000. So the expected annual cash flows I'll be having 945. That is an increment. Information on this project will be released to the market together with the announcement of the rights issue. The company paid a dividends of 4.5 in the previous financial year. The dividends, together with the company's earnings, expected to grow by 5% annually after investing in the expansion project. So given such a question, my good student, the first thing that we should always kind of remind ourselves is, if at all we remember the concept of rights issue. Basically, rights issue, just to explain, it is just an offer to existing shareholders to buy additional shares in proportion to their shareholding at a price lower than the market price. This is what we normally refer to as a right issue. We are saying that it's simply an offer to existing shareholders to buy additional shares in proportion to their shareholding at a price lower than the market price, meaning that they are given like at a discount. They are given at a discount. Basically, that is what we normally term it as a rights issue, as a right issue. And therefore, at this point, you'll find that it will be very important for us to understand the whole idea of what entails right issue, because we'll be talking of factors such as to determine the number of shares to be issued to raise desired funds. We'll also be required to determine number of maybe rights required to acquire one new share. Talk about theoretical ex-right price. These are some of the concepts that you must always tend to have at the back of our mind. So therefore, I'll just take you through some of these concepts so that you should always be very familiar, if at all I'm supposed to face them somewhere. Believing that you have the question. So we'll just look at the whole concept of rights issue. First of all, we've agreed and say that basically for us to understand rights issue is simply that offer whereby we are giving our existing shareholders to purchase these new shares at a price lower than the market price. That is what you said right issue entails. So you'll find that for right issues, we should always be required to understand some of these terms, which will include, upon us to know how to determine the number of shares to be issued. Key concepts is to determine the number of shares, to be issued, to determine number of shares to be issued. Of course, to raise desired funds, Number 2 element to understand is basically number of rights issues. Talk of number of rights required, number of rights required, number of rights required to acquire one new share. To acquire one new share. Talk of number 3 basically is to determine what we normally refer to as a theoretical, that is a theoretical ex-right price, theoretical ex-right price, which normally refer to it as a PX. Then finally, we should also be able to determine theoretical value of a right. How to determine theoretical value of a right. Theoretical value of a right. Basically, in this case, is simply the price at which the right is selling. Simply the price at which the right is selling. The price at which the right is selling. The price at which the right is selling. So once you are able to understand these concepts in regard to the right issues, you'll find that things on our end will always be very, very, very simple. Things on our end will always be very, very simple. So these are the main elements that, by the way, you must always be very good at whenever you're talking of issue of shares. More so whenever you're talking of rights issue. So we need to determine the number of shares to be issued to raise desired funds, because you'll find that these are one way of financing our projects, or rather financing the firm. So in financing the firm, of course, you can always tend to raise these shares to the shareholders for them to purchase new shares. We're talking of number of rights required to acquire the one new share, theoretical ex-right price, as well as theoretical value of a right. That is the price at which the right is selling. So these are some of the basic concepts, my good students, that for you to handle any question in financial management, more so whenever you're talking of rights issue, you just have to be very good on this concept. You just have to be very good on these concepts. So therefore, allow me to raise. Then we start by looking at how we can determine the number of shares to be issued. So in this case, we can determine the number of shares to be issued. In the event that we are required to determine the number of shares to be issued, how will we go about it? So number of shares, that is number 1. To understand how to determine number of shares, number of shares to be issued, number of shares to be issued to raise desired funds, to raise of course our desired funds. Because we say that is a one way of financing our projects. So in this case, whatever that we want to do is just basically to determine the number of shares that we need to raise for us to determine our new, or rather for us to raise that funds that we do require. So to do that, to determine the number of shares required, we'll just be taking this case, we'll just be taking the desired funds, that is of course desired funds, whatever that we need to raise, we are going to divide by the price per share, that is of course price at which the rights are, that is of course price per share. This will give us the number of shares that we do require to raise these desired funds. As simple as that. Desired funds, whatever that you're targeting, we divide by, of course, the price per share. And basically the price per share here, we are looking at price at which the rights issue, price at which the rights shares are sold. That is a subscription, or rather offer price. This is an offer price. This is basically offer price. Offer price or subscription price, whichever language that we can decide to use. But basically, that is what you should be having. Looking at the other point, number 2 here, is for us to understand how to determine the number of rights required. Number 2, determine number of rights required. Number of rights required to acquire one new share. To acquire one new share. Number of rights required to acquire one new share. That one will also be very simple, because at this point, my good students, will just be considering the following. That is, of course, I'll be considering the number of shares before rights issue. I'll be considering that is, of course, to determine our number of rights required. So number of rights required. Number of rights required to acquire one new share. I'll just be considering the price before rights issue. That is, of course, the number of shares before rights issue. So we're talking of number of shares. Number of shares before right issue. Number of shares before right issue. We are going, of course, to divide this one by talk of number of shares to be issued. 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 Of course, to raise what? To raise the desired funds. To raise the desired funds. To raise the desired funds. That is to determine the number of rights. To determine the number of rights required to acquire one new share. Proceed to element number talk over number, that is we've looked at that. Now proceed to number 3. How to determine theoretical ex-right price. Theoretical ex-right price. So talk of theoretical ex-right price. Theoretical ex-right price. I know if you are a student of FM, many a times in your paper, you will come across theoretical ex-right price so many times, right? So basically, how will we achieve that? To achieve that, basically, we need to consider the price of shares before right issue. That is a cum right price. So this is a theoretical ex-right price. So I don't know if this space will fit. Sort of theoretical ex-right price, which you're referring to it as a PX. Theoretical ex-right price. I'll just be taking our cum right, talk about aspect of cum right price. Cum right price. That is simply the price before right issue. That is simply, we are talking of the price of shares before rights issues, is what we normally refer to it as what? As cum right price. As cum right price. Then, of course, we are going to multiply by the number of shares before right issue. We multiply by number of shares before rights issue. That is existing shares. Number of shares before right issue. Okay. We are going to deduct that. We are going to deduct that. I really hope that my figures are visible. We are going to deduct that. You are going to deduct that by, we're going to deduct, actually not deducting, but we are going to add by our price at which the rights issue are sold. That is the subscription offer plus the offer price of these right issues times offer price of the right issues. Of course, we multiply here by our number of shares to be issued. Number of shares to be issued. New shares. New shares. New shares. All this, we are going to divide all this by taking our existing shares. Of course, the shares that we had before rights issue. So in this case, we are talking of basically existing shares. That is existing shares. We divide by existing shares plus the new shares that we are raising. Plus the new shares. I believe that is visible. I believe that is visible. Plus the new shares, yeah, is visible. So basically, we are talking of cum right price times the existing shares. The number of shares before right issues basically is what you are referring to as the existing shares. So cum right price, we multiply by the existing shares. We add the offer price or subscription price times the new shares. These are the shares that we are issuing to raise the desired funds. We divide by the existing shares plus what? Plus the new shares, plus the new shares. That will give us what we are referring to as X right price. That is theoretical X right price. Where recall, basically these are just price of shares after right issue. These are basically price of share. Theoretical X right price are just price of shares after right issues. Basically price of shares after right issue is what you normally refer to them as what? As X right, or rather theoretical X right price. Then lastly, which is also very important at this point, we should also look at this concept that we normally refer to as aspect of theoretical value. Theoretical value of a right. That is a theoretical value. Number 4, talk of theoretical value. Theoretical value. Theoretical value. Theoretical value of a right. Theoretical value for right. Price at which the right is selling. Price at which, this is simply price at which the right is selling. Price at which the right is selling is what you're terming it as a theoretical value of a right. Is what you're terming it as theoretical value of a right. Price at which these rights are selling. So therefore, in this case, to determine that, basically, we normally tend to talk of what we normally refer to as, this is term it as theoretical value of a right. Theoretical value of a right. Basically, we are going to take, of course, what we are referring to here as our talk of cum right price. Talk of cum right price. Cum right price. Come right price. Come right price. Of course, we less by, in this case, we are going to less X right price. X right price. We're going to less the X right price. We're going to less X right price. We're going to less the X right price. We're going to less X right price. So basically, this should give us a theoretical value. That should give us theoretical value of a right, price at which these rights are selling, price at which these rights are selling, price at which these rights are selling. So basically that is what we are talking about. Basically that is what we are talking about. In the event that anytime, my good students, you're supposed to figure out, or anytime you're talking of rights issues, basically these are some of the main concepts. These are some of the main concepts that must always be at our fingertips. These are some of the main concepts that must always be at our fingertips. So after we've mentioned that one, I think now we can proceed to the question, because now we've understood the basics of rights issues. Now we can consider and proceed to the question that you are given there. Allow me to erase here so that you can proceed to that question of ours. See what will be required to do in that question. You'll find that once I'm having the basics, things will be very easy on our end, right? Things will be very, very easy on our end. So looking at this question of ours here, looking at question that we are just looking at right now, which I believe you have it, which I believe you have it, which I believe you have it. That is issue of shares. Where's my question? Issue of shares. Okay. So that is the question that you are looking at, right? Which we've gone through it. So right now, I want us to handle part one of the question. Part one of the question, you're asked to compute the price of shares after the commencement of the rights issue, but before they start selling. That is, of course, but before they start selling ex-right. So simply there, of course, whatever that I'm required to do is to determine the cum right price. Where cum right price, at this point, we need to determine the cum right price. That is what the examiner wants us to determine. That's what the examiner wants us to determine, the cum right price. So, in that case, I think that will be very simple. So, what we really need to do here is basically to determine the current market price of our shares. We add the NPV per share. That is simply what examiner wants us to determine. So allow me to squeeze this question somewhere. I don't know if it's visible at that point, but if it's not visible, still you have downloaded the question. I believe you have it. So the first thing that the examiner wants us here is to determine the cum right price of, that is, of course, you are required to determine compute the price of the shares after the commencement of the rights issue. But before they start selling at ex-right.